You're watching or listening to Strangers in Space, and in this edition, we are going to be talking about Wish World, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR, straight, white, heterosexual.
I'm Ian, I'm the same.
I'm John. I'm the same.
And I'm mad.
Uh, so, I think all of our imagining about what Wish World would mean, all of our prediction, speculation about what the expression Wish World would mean, kind of wide of the mark, really, wasn't it? It wasn't a wish. Well, in some ways, it was a wish world in which people exist. But actually, it's the wish world that the god of wishes has put together for Conrad, which I have to say absolutely delighted me. That was the first nice surprise of the episode. Sorry, I'll say that again. That was the only nice surprise of the episode.
I was going to say, and the last.
No, okay, let's go round in a circle. And since I've started talking, the first 20, 25 minutes I was really quite enjoying. I quite like this. It's kind of got slight Severance vibes in the execution of it, but it's kind of human nature meets the sound of drums, right? It's so the sound of drums is sort of this slight political thriller where people are sort of trapped in a situation and reality has kind of changed around them such that kind of a version of fascism has taken over and they need to do something to counteract it, meets human nature, where the doctor's turned into a human being but doesn't realize that himself. So the two things are both going on at the same time. So once again, Russell T Davies is repeating himself. I kind of think the telling of the story ran out of steam at least 15 minutes before the end, really, and then just kind of relied on a surprise sort of reveal a couple of minutes before the end of it. But we'll get into all of that. Matt, what did you enjoy it?
I did. Yeah, I did. I think it's annoyed the right people looking on the internet, which is good. So
Okay.
that's one bonus. I think it's Russell T Davies having watched WandaVision and really loved WandaVision and doing his version of it, but it was different enough for it to make sense. And I think actually the last 15 minutes, I can see what you mean that the story sound kind of ground to a halt, but the stuff it says about doubt and how doubt is something that powers or creates an energy that does something. I really like that because I think that says something in addition to what was the one that it's a sequel to with
Lucky
Conrad
Day.
and
Lucky day.
Lucky Day. So it does something. It says something extra to what it was saying in Lucky Day. So it sort of expands that. And I like the way that really like the way he uses the Pantheon this time as this kind of engine for this guy. That was unexpected, and I liked the Rani
Well,
and
we'll
what he
dig
did with the
into
Rani, and it
all of
kind of all
those
made
things.
sense. It kind of all made sense to it. It appeared to be a jumble, but a
Oh,
bit
yeah.
like Wedding of River Song. I think it all made sense to me. It all clicked together. Um,
I think
so yeah, I liked it.
I think we'll find out next week how well it fits together. But I have to say, I was watching the individual bits and thinking, oh, actually, Russell T Davies has said, right, I'll have A, B, C, and D. And if I put them all together like so, they all
Mm.
fit together like a perfect jigsaw. And so there was a point at which I thought, oh, the reason Conrad's there is because they've essentially installed him as the master of the land of fiction, sort of thing. It clearly
Mhm.
wasn't the land of fiction, but essentially it's that same idea. And kind of it basically was. And using one of the gods to make that happen, finally it seems that Russell T Davies has worked out what gods do.
Mm.
Because a lot of the other sort of pantheon stories have kind of they've been gods by name but not really by nature, but here actually controlling people and creating stuff, that is essentially what they're for. I guess we'll get more back into that. Let's carry on around the table. Ian, I'm going to save you since you've not been around for a while. John.
I liked a lot of the imagery. I liked a lot of the ideas, as Matt said there, but the execution just fell a bit flat for me. It's not like last year's, Legend of Ruby Sunday, which was rising tension all the way, really.
Mm.
This was just kind of on a level all the way through. There wasn't any moments to kind of get you out of your seat, I don't think. And that big reveal is the same as last year. It's like, oh, it's this old villain from the 70s and the 80s.
Except it was the reveal of an idea.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, Omega's here, is he? Is he?
Is he?
Is he?
Well, apparently you vaguely heard him. I didn't quite catch it, but...
Well, and then there's something interesting going on with Rogue too, isn't there? So presumably Rogue gets to come back next week too.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he does. That smacks of they've got Goff on green screen because he's busy on Merrily, the Sondheim musical in Broadway. So
well,
that's
maybe
all he might be able to do.
But where's Groff?
In a hell dimension, and
possibly where's Omega?
The under world.
Yeah. So I thought the same as Matt initially. Oh, he's just in for a 20-second cameo, and that'll be his bit. And it might well be that. It might well be that people have fallen into this hell dimension or whatever. And so we just get to see an example of that. But it could be that it's something slightly more important than that. And again, Iain, tell me what you thought.
I mean,
then we'll explain why you're wrong.
I'm looking forward to that bit. I was watching it for the first half hour. I was kind of you realise that because it's part one of a two-part finale, this should be the most frictionless script to assemble. We all know how this works. You have 45 minutes to basically ask a lot of questions, then you have a cliffhanger, and then next week it all goes to somewhere different. So I was watching the first half, and I was thinking, this reminds me of the X-Files episode where Mulder and Scully are a married couple undercover, or a Buffy episode where they all wake up and they're different. And I was, watching it and thinking, on a visual level, this is absolutely fantastic. But at no point was I sort of really interested in anything that was happening. And then that last kind of 15-minute sweep just made me think he's kind of doubling down on what Big Finish do and just plucking names out of a hat and making some kind of random implausible alliance. We've now got some of Doctor Who's most sort of scientific baddies in a magic universe, which I don't see how it's going to work. But the Rani, Omega, they are very much, she started out as a biologist, but then there was a bit of chemistry going on. And by time in the Rani, she was all about the physics. And Omega's obviously a stellar engineer. And they've, got some kind of club going where they're being helped by gods who blow flowers at people. I don't know.
No, but you see, Iain, this is what I think Russell T Davies has done particularly well, is he has said, okay, here's a scientist, and here is the original scientist. And if the scientist that we've got now looks up to anybody, it would be the original scientist. Mm-hmm. And because they're a Time Lord and they have access to all this kind of information, or the ability to sort of seek out and find information that we don't have, what if the scientist that we're concentrating on discovers that the original scientist is not dead, but is in a place where they're irretrievable? Wouldn't that scientist want to retrieve them? And if you've caused this situation, and I still think that Russell T Davies probably is going to close off this situation at some point, where you've opened up the gateway to magic coming into your universe, which includes the bi-generation, right? That's part of the magic that's come into our universe. Never happened before the Toymaker. And it probably won't happen again after the Toymaker. And there's a line in the giggle, isn't there, to say that the Toymaker's essentially caused the Doctor's bi-generation, or it's happened because the Toymaker's here. And we had the laugh from the baby, didn't we? If magic has come into your universe and you're a scientist, what else would you do but try and harness it? So if these gods are around, as a scientist, you don't say, oh, the gods are above us. You say, right, if the gods are there, how can we harness them and use that energy to do something? And so her plan is to resurrect the god of science, the person that presumably as a Time Lord scientist she most looks up to and respects. It's a bit like if you had the ability to take the DNA of anybody who had been alive on planet Earth in the past sort of 150 years or whatever, however long you can go back before their DNA just probably stops existing because, it's all gone into the earth or whatever in their coffin. Whose grave would you go to and dig up? And some people would go to Hitler's grave and dig up Hitler and recreate his DNA, and you get a film like The Boys from Brazil. Essentially, this is the Time Lord version of Boys in Brazil. We would go for somebody like Einstein. She goes for
Serena
Omega.
Williams.
I was thinking of Nigel Mansell, but he's not dead. But
James Hunt.
Yeah, but
Do you
he
know what I
wasn't as
mean,
good.
Do you know what I mean, though?
Yeah.
I think the premise is brilliant, but as always, it's whether the execution quite works.
I
And
did
like
wonder
John
if we
says,
were.
Oh, I was just
Sorry.
going to finish off and say, like John says, there's no sense of rising tension. I said it's a bit like the sound of drums. It is, but in the sound of drums, you've got that conversation at the start between the Doctor and the Master. And so the sound of drums becomes, when will their two paths connect? Here, it's the reveal that it's Omega. So you've got no sense of it being Omega before you get to the reveal. And even when you get the reveal, you don't actually get Omega. You just get the reveal that it's him. And there's no sense of the pathways connecting. So Russell T Davies has come up with this brilliant idea, but it seems to be one that it's hard to turn into a narrative in some ways. I don't know, Matt. Disagree with me on that if you want.
No, well, we haven't had John yet speak, but that doesn't really matter. I think it's more this year. It's more about the mystery, so I didn't mind that lack of sort of the tension. I mean, I really liked the Sutek two-parter. So
But your
um,
taste is questionable.
so
That's what you're
yeah, so
saying.
my taste is questionable. This time, yeah, it felt a bit treading water. I agree with Ian that there was a lot of repetition from Buffy, The X-Files, WandaVision. I think where it saved it here was the revelation that this was a world created by Conrad, who's already been set up as this kind of MAGA, wasn't it great in the olden days? And this world is like the 1950s. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's sort of suddenly the created world becomes a kind of a satire, a political satire,
It's
which
Doctor Who's
I was
Stepford Wives.
stroking my chin and chuckling about rather than getting all that excited. But I also agree that linking the Rani with Omega makes perfect sense because as Ian says, Omega's a physicist, Durrani's a biologist, chemist, and there is a line in it which sort of addressed my worry that Durrani was going to be a female master, where she sort of says that the other renegade Time Lords, they're all about death, I'm about life,
Yeah, yeah.
and that kind of sums up in a Russell T Davies way exactly my concerns, which is the Rani is a Dr. Moreau figure rather than a Moriarty figure. She's not
She's
killing
not
people
here to kill.
for the sake of it.
Yeah.
She's
She's here
here
to
to create life, even if it's
resurrect. Yeah.
even if it's malevolent and horrible. And that's
Well,
quite surprising to me.
Omega never was malevolent and horrible, was
No.
he? He was vengeful.
Kind of is in Arc Infinity, but I think Arc Infinity and he is originally supposed to be the devil, in Bob Baker and Dave Martin's original idea for him. So he's the
Yes.
Time Lord devil.
But the devil is a fallen angel. And the whole point of Omega is that he starts off as an angel, a scientist, a creator, somebody who puts the Time Lords on the pathway.
Are you
to-
saying there can be shades of grey, JR? Are you saying people
no, I
aren't
won't
bad or
have that.
good?
I mean,
Outrageous.
But that's kind of the point,
strictly,
isn't it?
strictly speaking, it's Satan that's the fallen angel, and Satan and the devil aren't automatically synonymous. But
Okay, but you get my point. Omega starts out as very much a good person, a person who is a hero in Time Lord society, and
Or
only
it's
becomes
mythologized to become one.
yeah, sure, but you become mythologized to become one in the same way as, I don't know, going back to what I said before, we kind of mythologize Einstein, don't we? It's like he turns up in adverts all the time now, doesn't he? Played by whoever that actor is who always seems to play him. Because we've mythologized him, we've turned him into we've turned him into something beyond what he actually was, and he's become this sort of caricature of what he really is. And the same for Omega, I guess, but it makes perfect sense to go, and this is the point, in part two, are we going to get Omega? And will Russell T Davies draw him in shades of grey, or will it just be a black and white? Yeah, he's mad scientist gone absolutely feral, like the Master in the End of Time or something? Or will we actually see shades of grey? And it's Russell T Davies, so you tend to think, oh, you're not going to get the shades of grey. But I think the way this series has been going, kind of, there's been shades of grey in several of the stories this year that you don't tend to normally associate with Russell T Davies. And while the execution of some of those episodes has been on the nose, the actual subjects of those episodes themselves have been really interesting. Lucky Day was very interesting in the way it dealt with a lot of the politics. It did not make Conrad the outright villain. It said that even those on the side of good, Unit, are responsible for villainy of their own, and there is no black and white. There is only these different shades of grey and compromises that you make in order to achieve your vision. And I don't know, but last year we were quite excited for episode 8. I don't want to get too excited for episode 8 this time. But the one mitigating factor is these 2 seasons have essentially been all one story. So it's not a story arc that began and finished in series 1, 14, whatever you want to call it, and another story arc that's begun and finished in series 2. This thing about the Pantheon that started with the Tennant specials has carried on and achieved a sort of apex of a kind with Sutek in that first series. But even then, the story was telling us this is not the end of this story, and Sutek is not the apex of this story that you think he is. We're going further, we're going harder, there's going to be more. And now we're getting to potentially the end of that. I think this must be the end of that, because Davis must have known that there was questions about what was going to happen after series 2. So it feels like it.
Likely end of one strand, I would say. It won't be the end of the full series, because this feels, the whole Pantheon thing feels like a different backdrop for the Doctor universe, a way to make it feel different without kind of resetting the universe in, as say Steve Moffat did with it. Because it's like what he did with the Time War. It's there to inform it without changing, without deleting what's gone before.
Sure, but I think at some point you have to put the toy maker back in the box, or what the toy maker has done back in the box. And it feels like he must have known there would be a gap after the second series, regardless of how long that gap necessarily would be. It feels like a natural point at which to go back to the previous status quo. But you're right, it might not be. Davis is going to be around for the next couple of years. It could be that this is a thing that does carry on.
Well, he had plans for, was it 5 seasons, I think?
I think that's what he said.
Yeah.
He's definitely said at least 4. So yeah, it could be that it carries on. Who knows?
Which makes me think if Omega is the one who waits, then maybe we don't get to see him next week. Maybe we see like one hand coming out of a fiery hell dimension, but he's blasted back, but he's being set up as the kind of big bad for the overall 5-year master plan.
Do we have a cast list for next week? Is like, Ian McKellen in it, or an undisclosed actor part, or something like
Patrick
that?
Stewart, someone,
Yeah.
David Gravitas.
We did know that actress's name's gone right out of my head. Rani. We did know that she was coming in to play a villain. We just didn't know which one, and it was never stated at which episode she'd turn up. So the Rani was always on the cards, but there's no sort of similar name that could be Omega insofar as I'm aware. If we do get an Omega, of course, it could be like Arc of Infinity, where he inhabits somebody else's body. So it could be that Rogue is in it as possessed by Omega or something.
I mean, Carol Ann Ford is going to be back as well. And
you'd think.
Certainly, yeah. Give her the part of the arch villain. I'm sure she could pull it off.
I'd watch.
But
it'd
it's
be horrific one way or another.
But it certainly feels like she could be in it because, again, they've teased an appearance in some
I think
ways.
she's got a better chance of being in it than Jonathan Groff because she's not on Broadway at the moment. And I mean, I did watch Doctor Who Unleashed last week, and it did sort of frame her as this amazing actress that they've somehow persuaded to come back to be on television. She, they've they've gone through her diary and found 5 minutes for her to
Well,
record this
to be
cameo in Doctor
fair,
Who.
it might be more to do with her age than her
Yeah, yeah,
availability.
I think, Matt, the telling thing was what the director said, which was how good she is at taking direction.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's because they're wheeling her around. So it's always easier to direct someone when you're pushing them.
Should we come back to some of the sort of ongoing continuity bits in a minute and just talk about the Wish World stuff, about whether it worked for a bit? For example, the sort of Russell T Davies with his tables don't do that he's been saying for the past 7 days.
I mean that was the moment I started worrying a little bit that Newton was going to turn up and that it was going to be all about gravity. But actually, I think that was the point
You mean
where
Revity?
it would have happened, but didn't. And then it's actually about the salt rather than the gravity.
Oh yeah, but now that the Doctor's got his personality back, he might suddenly.
I thought and he's falling down.
Well, it might strike
a
him.
long way.
Gravity.
He's falling down and
Gravity
going, "Oh
gloves.
yes, it's all about gravity," he says. Yeah.
Could be.
I liked Wishworld, but I liked this revelation of who's created it. And this
Okay, I
whole
haven't finished my point about the
Go on.
tables.
Oh, okay.
Put a pin in what you were saying. I was just going to say, so Russell T Davies has been saying this thing about the tables, which has been a little bit irritating, and that you kind of expected would turn out to be a nonsense. But again, I think actually the idea. So his irritating thing about repeating the line is after the fact. He writes the story first and then he repeats the line after the fact to make something irritating of it. But in the story itself, the fact that the table exists only in the imagination of Conrad turned real by this god of the wishes or whatever, and that if you express doubt, then the table's function falters in some way. And they had a word for it. I can't remember the word they called it, but they had
Slip.
a slip. Yeah, exactly. A slip in the function of the table. I thought the execution of that actually was really good. And so actually, I thought that was a really good idea he's put in the script. I, I think Russell T Davies has been a lot more impressive here than he was last year, for example.
And it's weird as well that there's weird touches, like the wheelie bin filled with broken mugs, and
Mm.
it's always the same mug that falls through. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's
It's
just
because
a
Conrad
neat way of setting
lacks
it up.
that imagination, that power of imagination. Everything's
Yeah.
the same.
But
But
then
also,
also, yeah, everything's the same because he is a white supremacist and he wants everybody to be the same, right? But also, I suppose, if it all comes out of his imagination, you've only got so much to go around, haven't you? So you just think of a cup and everybody's got the same cup because then you've got to think of something else. And you don't think of all the different types of cups, you just think of one, right?
but it also says complicated things that I haven't quite worked through in my head about doubt and conspiracy theories because Conrad is a conspiracy theorist. So for him, doubt is part of his personality. He
Of his
doubts
lifeblood.
everything, but actually he's doubting fantasy rather than
It's
so
just,
he's doubting reality rather than fantasy. He's living in reality and he thinks that there's a fantastic world that's actually real.
Which
but
is
it's
Whereas,
why they've
his
chosen him, yeah.
reality.
yeah.
It depends how cynical you think Conrad's being, how cynical you think that version of the right is being.
Well, I think this exposes how cynical Conrad is. I think this now exposes the fact that he actually believes what he says, and he really does think that there's this fantastic, great world that looks a bit like the 1950s, where everything's controlled and women stay at home and blah 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 blah. Um,
Or I don't know. The sense I took of it is that he knows what's real and what's not real, but that's not what he wants. And so I think Lucky Day was not about the fact that he doesn't believe in aliens, but that he does believe in aliens, but he doesn't want other people to because he doesn't like the idea. I think that's what a lot of these sort of conspiracy theorists and, their sort of online far right discourse is about. It's not about whether you understand that everybody's the same, regardless of the color of their skin or, their sexual proclivity or whatever. We are all the same, but they don't want us to be the same because they only want a certain particular edition of that sameness to be.
They want their narrative to be the dominant. Is what
Yeah.
this is fundamentally saying. And
And
I
I
quite
think-
like this, that the
Yeah.
Rani is using that
Yes.
completely. That's
And-
gorgeous.
And so she picks him deliberately because she knows he doesn't believe it. And that's where the doubt comes from that she needs.
And you get
Yeah.
half a sense that Mrs. Flood has been auditioning people for this as well.
Hmm.
Because
Well, yeah.
Conrad could have been the guy in Robot Revolution.
Or the
potentially.
guy in
William
last week's
App.
last week's App Gwilym.
Mhm.
Yeah, so there's been like I
Kid
said,
was last week, wasn't it?
yeah, again, this makes sense of it, doesn't it? In a way that we didn't necessarily think was going to happen. But you're right. We have had like 4 or 5 examples of sort of far right incels or whatever expression you want to use to describe them across the last couple of years. And you're right, Mrs. Flood always turns up and it's like, okay, so I'm not going to use the guy from the Interstellar Song Contest. And this is the one she chooses because this is the one who doesn't actually believe the things he says. And that's what she needs.
Hey, maybe she turned up after we left the story of Dot and Bubble, and she rescued all the racists and gave them a happy ending.
Well, she may well have turned up to find out more about them, to see if any of them were suitable, mightn't she? It has been the theme of the last 2 years.
It's also that kind of repetition that we recognise, because we recognised that Russell T Davies was starting to present incels on, or put incels on screen, or fascists, or conspiracy theorists, and it's exactly the sort of thing that The Sun gets cross about when it puts Doctor Who on its front page and suggests that Ncuti Gatwa has been sacked because Doctor Who's too woke and it's going down in the ratings. Ironically, it's on the front page of The Sun, which suggests that Doctor Who still has cultural impact and weight and still has meaning. So I saw it on the front page of The Sun. I loved seeing Doctor Who on the front page of The Sun. I read it a little bit. I got a bit cross, but then I remembered it's on the front page of The Sun. So who cares? Great. And nonsense.
Well, Doctor Who acts in BBC plot again.
Yeah.
But
40
then,
years on, they've not changed.
But then for me, that is worrying too. So on the one hand, it's great that Doctor Who still has that cultural impact. But at the same time, it's terrifying that...
Oh, it's worrying for actual reality.
Oh, yeah.
Great news for Doctor Who. So,
I mean,
who
the good
cares
news,
about actual reality.
the good news is that the circulation of the Sun is now so low that 200,000 mad old people are going to be reminded that Earth has black people on it and gay people, and they're already cross about that.
Yeah, I apologize. I was forgetting that you're sat in the epicenter of conspiracy believing.
Well, literally
mad
my
shit
house.
going on.
Yeah.
Well, pretty much. I mean, you're just outside of. Oh, well, I won't say where you're located, just in case the FBI.
All I'm saying is the stories that Iain thinks we are bad ones in the end.
Yeah, just be careful. Just be careful what you get Iain to talk about. Otherwise, don't go back to Rockville. Might become all too real for him.
Hey!
What about the bone stuff? I really liked the bone stuff. It was very Lawrence Miles, but
And also, again, the explanation was brilliant. Or not the explanation, but
was there an explanation?
No, not the explanation. The thing about it's reality, but it's not reality. They look real, but they're not actually there. Again, that was another example. So, I mean, this is Russell T Davies just go, what can we make that's spectacular, that uses up some of the effects money, that gets our point across? And it didn't have to be...
And it works with the Rani as well. So anything biological, or if she's going to make a base, making it in the skeleton of a giant spider or...
Dinosaur.
Dinosaurs, yes.
Well, she kept a dinosaur skeleton on her TARDIS, didn't she, in Mark of the Rani?
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's a reference back to Mark of the Rani. It's deliberate. It's a deliberate choice. It doesn't make any sense here, necessarily, but it's a deliberate choice.
But it's a cool visual. Really.
Oh, absolutely.
You would imagine that one thing Russell T Davies is trying to do is direct viewers back to the Three Doctors and Mark of the Rani and direct them away from Time of the Rani and the Arc of Infinity. I'm suspecting that he'll go with the former two as his kind of touchstones for Rani and Omega.
Okay, we had three shots of Kato Mara, though, didn't we? And
Yeah.
one of them was definitely Mark of the Rani, and the other two, I can't remember. It went by really quickly. Does anybody know?
It's two marks and one time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Was it? It wasn't a Dimensions.
Tragically not. They probably can't clear that yet because I think there were issues with that, weren't they? Still.
No expense. But you'd have thought that given the Disney money, the expense wouldn't have been such an issue. I think you can license the footage, but it's hideously expensive to license it because that's what the charity demands. But, 1 second, 2 seconds, I don't think that would have cost that much, which is why I wondered if maybe they'd used a little bit of that, but perhaps not. Also, it's got that weird 3D effect on it, so it might not have come out to, which you don't notice when you watch it on YouTube or whatever. But if you upscaled it to 4K or whatever, that might have obliterated the footage somehow, so we couldn't see it anyway. So maybe they just couldn't use that. Do we like Archie Punjabi, wasn't
Punjabi.
it? Yeah.
Yes.
I thought she was a pleasant surprise, really. I wasn't quite sure how they would go, where they would go with it and how she would manage with it, but she wasn't the master, the toy maker, all manic and hideous. She was controlled, but relatively self-aware in the way that Kato Mara was, I think.
I think Mrs. Flood is making sense of the villain's dynamic in this.
Yeah.
Because she's, as we sort of predicted last week, because she's sort of the sub to the Rani's Dom. There's that kind of weird stuff going on, and she's starting to get a bit cross. But it's kind of taken by generation to a different place. So you haven't got the old person retiring anymore. You've got the old person becoming the new person's companion, which is quite interesting.
But
I think
also, she's still got plenty of agency, hasn't she? Which was quite nice to see. She's still off.
Yeah. I thought it was going to be a kind of a Frankenstein and Ego relationship. And it isn't anything like that. It's not
No.
a subservient. There is an element of it, but it's moans like hell about it.
It's not been as funny as I imagined it probably would be. I was kind of expecting second and third Doctor vibes, and we've not really had that, but the potential is still there for that to come in. And I still predict that Mrs. Flood at some point will become the Rani's downfall herself.
I think it might be one of those moments where you wish it was Stephen Moffat writing it.
Yeah.
Because his treatment of Missy and the Master and Johnson and Michelle Gomez.
Well, I think we haven't mentioned, the Rani says this is all about, like, it's an inversion of Death in Heaven.
Yeah.
The Master all about death, Rani's all about life. So, companion piece, maybe.
Oh, for sure. Well, like I'm always saying, Russell T Davies has seen what the others have done, and he's like, okay, I can do a version of that's me, rather than the version that Stephen Moffat did that was him.
Oh, it's me.
But he definitely is, isn't he? I think he definitely is. I don't think there's any question, really.
Yeah, and I mean, I think part of it is that his entire run coming back has been about using Doctor Who's history as much as anything else. He's dealing with contemporary issues, but he's quite happy to pluck the bits of history that still might work, that serve his purpose with it.
I think it's partly he regrets not having done that the last time, but also now it's all in one place. He's sort of using that fact that the old Doctor Who have now, they sort of created this kind of library of it on an iPlayer or whatever. He knows it's there for people to go back to, so he feels more comfortable than he did in the time of Rose, where the people who had Spearhead from Space were probably fans and watching it anyway, so it wasn't.
It's kind of trying to make the past an active part of the present, I think.
And basically, even without the sort of iPlayer thing, you're right, because it's just that. In 2005, if you wanted to watch old Doctor Who, you had to go and look for it. But these days, just with the way the internet is, if you want to watch old Doctor Who, even if you've not got iPlayer, you've got Daily Motion and everything else. You always can find things these days. The past is, very much available to us if you know where to look, and even if you don't, and obviously they've made it really simple with Doctor Who. So yeah, he
And
has done this very differently. And you're right. I think he's doing way more politics now than he ever was the first time around. The first time around, occasionally you had incidental politics, but it was never about that. This time, I think it is. And we've said it. You've said it, Matt, I think, and John definitely also. After years and years, Russell T Davies has very much turned more into somebody who's interested in what you can say with television as opposed to just what you can show with it.
the other thing about old Doctor Who with Russell T Davies is there was that moment where new fans started watching it on Twitch and really running with it during the
Yeah.
pandemic. I think there were lots of things. There were lots of things that have happened in the pandemic that I think inspired Russell T Davies in a different direction to do Doctor Who and to how he sees Doctor Who and the potential of Doctor Who.
How was Go on, John.
No, I was just going that I would also feed in the tweet alongs as well, because obviously he was very aware of those,
Yeah, yeah.
So yes, yeah, go on, Joe.
I was only going to say, how do we think Belinda was treated? Because
I begin to think she's been wasted this season. She really hasn't had very much interesting to do. It's almost kind of like the version of Mel we had in the 80s, where she all you had from her was computer program from Peace Pottage, bit bubbly. All you got is from Belinda is nurse wants to get home. And it's not much more than that for the actress to play with. I don't
I know, nurse,
I
very
love Barada
competent.
Yeah. Yeah. Barada Sethu has been she's an engaging actress, I think. She's worked with what she's had, but it's not enough.
It does feel a bit like, and Steve was saying this off or online, I can't remember, probably scandalously. It does feel like the companion's role in these two seasons uh, wasn't necessarily in Russell T Davies's first draft of the script, and he's had to adapt them to change the companion halfway through.
See, this would fit in with what my wife came up with, because while I was away earlier in the week, they started watching this last season, and there's a line in Space Babies
Brilliant.
where the Doctor says to Poppy, we aren't your mum and dad. I wish we could be." So I think that was
Right.
meant to be feeding in here somewhere.
Oh, Poppy. We'll come back to Poppy because that is definitely something of significance. There's got to be a reason why she's there, but we'll come back to that because I think I still want to talk about Belinda for a minute and the situation because we've had all these rumours that Millie Gibson was supposed to be across both series, and then something went wrong, and it was either that she and Ncuti Gatwa didn't get on, or I don't know, all sorts of things were said. I don't think it was that she and Ncuti Gatwa didn't get on because they seemed to get on like a house on fire, but maybe not. I don't think you necessarily get the impression that Millie Gibson was supposed to be in these episodes and Verada Sethu wasn't, because I think the way Millie Gibson's gone out of it and come back in just the two episodes so far as an outsider to the events works so well, it's hard to see how that could have worked if she had been at the Doctor's side when all of those things were going on. But obviously, the negative impact of that is you have to introduce a character who's going to be secondary to Millie Gibson's character. So I think this is very much 2 years of stories about Ruby Sunday, but Ruby Sunday can't be in a lot of those stories. So Verada Sethu becomes a sort of substitute character, and she's a great actress. But you're right, John. She's not had a great deal to do. I don't know. I wonder if they said to her when they took her on, look, we need somebody to come in and be second fiddle, but take center stage. Are you prepared to do that? And if that's what they said to her, and she said yes, because she was on set for Boom. Maybe they went to her when she was doing Boom and said, look, this is what we need. I don't know. If that's what they said, that feels fair enough to me. But you're right. It does feel a bit like the character's underserved, even if the actress has just been great.
It feels a bit in this particular episode, the moment where Belinda goes off running in the woods because she's doubted something and then screams into the thing. It feels like the natural place for her to go next is central London, where she meets up with the group of
Yeah.
dispossessed people.
Yeah.
So it just felt like that's a point where it felt like there was a draft where it was one companion that did all that.
Yeah, yeah.
And so Belinda being up in the crow's nest or wherever, she didn't have a lot to do up there, and I felt that she was a bit underserved. But if she had been doing what Ruby had been doing down at the bottom, suddenly you get
Yeah, yeah.
a more balanced script. That's why I felt maybe there was sort of an earlier draft with it
There's
with just one. I also
definitely
did
something's been going on,
so
hasn't there?
Ruby's son that said that Shooting Out were a Millie Gibson. They sort of shared uh, a scene, but you never saw their faces in the same shot. It was
No.
all sort of reversed shots. So there is. I'm still not completely sure whether the scandalous rumor that they didn't get along isn't disproved by this story because they could quite easily have not been on set at the same time.
Oh yeah, for sure. It just feels really weird because you look at the two of them and they have this chemistry. They did last year.
It's great actors.
Maybe. I mean, but my whole thing about them is I think it's their chemistry that makes them sort of egg each other on in performance terms, which I didn't like,
Yeah.
which didn't sit well with me, but it definitely felt like chemistry.
What is it
So
that they're inactive? They're trying to top each other in scenes. That
might
might be
be.
what's
Maybe
going on.
that's it. Yeah, who knows? But
I mean, they definitely wouldn't get on if they were trying to top each other. That would be like a War of the Roses situation.
Wouldn't that
fine.
be a great story though?
A really great, really great story behind the scenes. God, an adventure in time and space would be much more lively if
Oh,
Hartnell and William Russell were actively trying to kill each other and there was a murder thing going on. I'd watch that again.
Fair
I
enough.
mean, Mark Gatiss has probably rewritten it just for his new series, Bookish. That's probably a plot.
There's one line of very self-aware dialogue from Russell T Davies, which I wrote down. It was that self-aware. I wanted to get it exactly right. This isn't just exposition.
Yeah,
but I thought that was great because
yeah,
it
yeah,
isn't. It's vital to what she's doing. It's
yeah.
lovely, brilliant
I,
joke. It's a
yeah.
writer's joke, isn't it?
Oh, sure. The problem with that is it shines a light on the fact, yeah, it's not the exposition that's the problem. It's the actually making it into a story that's the problem. You've stopped to have a 10-minute dialogue scene. Let there be something happening. Cut away to stuff, I don't know, whatever. But a 10-minute dialogue scene that sort of relentlessly carries on and on and on. Okay, it might not just be exposition, Russell, but it kind of feels like it. There are other ways to show what you're doing.
I mean,
And that for me was the only disappointing part of it, I
it's
think.
kind of it's a Russell T Davies script, so we know that these things are going to happen. It's whether or not what they're saying is actually interesting. That's the thing that saves Russell T Davies. It's not the jokes necessarily. It's not the kind of the sort of the bringing up baby kind of frenetic pace of the comedy. It's about the ideas that are expressed in the long interminable bits of interminable bits of dialogue.
And I
And in this case, that's wrapped up in this whole thing about doubt and the reasons why the Rani is trying to crack through reality to the underverse, what the underverse is. And so that's why I didn't mind all of that stuff or the Omega reveal because, it makes sense. That's where he is. It all sort of fits together.
I wonder though if there's a sort of fundamental problem in the episode, in the premise, which is that by having everybody effectively brainwashed and unaware of what's going on, they might be having doubts about what's going on around them, but they don't have any awareness of it. So they don't know what it is they're having doubts about or why it is. And so therefore they don't question the reality, but they're having doubts about the nature of it. And
I
they and
mean,
so
the thing is, it's a alternative reality story, so you know things are going to have to be reset at the end.
oh yeah, no, but
So
John,
it's
my
yeah,
point is you've chosen a premise that doesn't give the characters any agency.
yeah.
And so you don't allow them to investigate the premise. And so when you get that long dialogue scene, that entire dialogue scene has to both explain to the characters and to the watching audience what's going on, rather than allowing the characters to find out what's going on for themselves so that it becomes a progression of the release of information. Essentially, what we had was half an hour in the Wish world where we're all thinking, what's going on? and then 15 minutes where somebody tells us what's going on. Whereas if they had a slightly different premise, would have allowed us to find things out as it was going. And that didn't feel like that's what was happening. It felt like a huge info dump at the end.
I don't think Ncuti Gatwa quite pulled off the sort of
Thank God
dawning
he went there.
realizations coming back to him, or the memories coming back to him.
No,
So there
you're
was a
right.
risk that there is a risk that if you can't if you can't demonstrate that in your acting, it turns into mind warp, where you're still not sure if the doctor's remembered, or you're not sure what status or what kind of doctor you have in front of you. And I'm not sure the flashbacks to the previous doctors quite did that, or made that point. And
Yeah,
his performance was more sort of falling to his knees like he's in pain. But I don't know how he would have done that performance, but he's the actor. He'd be better
yeah.
than me.
It's a very clumsy way to tell the audience at home he's got his memories back because he remembers Tom Baker.
But it worked in Human Nature. That moment really landed. That worked.
Oh, because that that was down to a mechanical thing. He opens the watch, the memories come out of the watch, he
Yeah.
gets the memories, he gets it back. Here, you've got effectively it has to perform the same thing, but without the mechanics of opening the watch. So you've got to do it through the performance rather than through the action.
Would it have been better to have Susan there for that, given they set her up
Well,
last week?
well, yeah. Yeah, you're probably right,
But
actually.
but it also worked in Human Nature because John Smith in Human Nature was completely different to the Doctor in
Well,
terms
yeah.
of accent and appearance. And then there was that kind of twist where he pretends to be John Smith for a bit longer. Here, John Smith, Ncuti Gatwa, kind of plays John Smith as the Doctor,
Yeah.
but and so there are moments where the Doctor's personality comes through, but because he's playing John Smith as the Doctor, you don't really notice it. So where he
Mm.
sort of mentions that he's attracted to men, and that gets him into trouble, or he wonders who this person is, that gets him into trouble. But because he's playing the whole thing like the Doctor, just
Yeah.
in a kind of different dialogue, I don't
Environment.
And,
know.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and the thing is, John Smith here is a caricature of what that kind of guy's meant to be. It's all meant to be fitting into that role. It's not John Smith, who is a very beautifully sketching character for 2 episodes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Poppy. So I don't know. Any thoughts about Poppy? She must have been brought back for a reason.
Well,
Ian
there's
hasn't spoken in about half
yes.
an hour, just for the
No, I
voiceover.
have absolutely no thoughts or interest in Poppy whatsoever. So
Okay, because when you
this is
said I've
not the
got,
time to bring me in.
I don't know.
The,
I don't
was it,
really either, to be honest.
well, the thing was, again, that was one of the things that is flagged up in the line of dialogue that she's real.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, as he's
So
falling. So
yeah,
it's obviously going to be some. I mean, he's got a daughter, so he's got a granddaughter. Is the line? I'm not sure what the significance of her being the same baby as in Space Babies.
Presumably,
Yeah.
because she's there and she's real, that means that he's got the faith and confidence that his reality is the real reality. So it underscores him getting his memory back. And as he plummets, presumably next week's going to kick off with him waking up in the TARDIS because they're still in the TARDIS, right?
Well, I was just
Um,
about to bring the TARDIS up.
so yeah, that's all I think that is.
They might not necessarily be in the TARDIS. They might be in the world, but presumably the solution to him falling is going to be that's not real. You're not really falling.
Yeah, he's going to wake up in the TARDIS, fly the TARDIS into the Wish world, and then I mean, I could do next week's episode beat for beat. It would be rude.
I
You're
think
probably right
I
because
think
there
he's
is,
gonna no, I think he's gonna end up in the Netherverse because everything's going down into this sort of space.
and you think he's going that way
And
too.
that the Netherverse is basically the antimatter universe. That
Okay.
but
Omega. We know that Omega lives
restated
in.
in a fantasy
Yeah,
text. Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. A Dante kind of text.
But I think his
yeah.
daughter is his. I think there's something about the baby. There's something about his daughter that's going to come back because I think Russell T Davies is embracing I get a feeling he's starting to embrace timeless children and the Doctor's granddaughter and the Doctor's history in this. Whether he
Russell
can
T
fit
Davis.
that into one episode, I don't know.
Russell T Davis has always favoured family going up. So you have your main characters, and then you have the parents and grandparents. And for the first time now, and the reintroduction of Susan kind of really puts a nail in this, Russell T Davis is starting to embrace family going down, so children and grandchildren. And so this is I don't think we've really seen this from Russell T Davis before. Not really ever. I don't think. I'm trying to think of an example which is about the main characters having children as opposed to parents. And I can't think of any really. It's always been about the older generations rather than the younger ones.
Yeah, Donna's the only companion.
Is there an element where this is because Russell T
that's what I
Davis
mean.
is now a 60-year-old man, not a 40-year-old man?
Could be. No, yeah, John, I meant since he's come back with the specials. So from that point onwards.
Oh, Donna has a daughter.
That's what I mean. That's
Yeah,
the
that's
first
it,
example of
yeah.
it. Prior to that, I don't think there's any examples of it, really, is there?
Yeah.
So it could be that Poppy is another iteration of that becomes important, not because of who she is, Poppy from the Space Babies, but because that's what she is. She's a child, somebody's child.
You can kind of go with the Doctor's daughter, but that's I accept the dodgy case.
Yeah, that's not really about children, is it?
Did our like sort of semi-insider spoilery kind of gossipy stuff, did that mention Omega at all? I basically we had
There
so
was,
much of it
yeah.
in private conversations that I didn't know whether Omega was a genuine surprise to me because there was so much gossip.
Yeah.
I know Omega came up in conversation 2 or 3 times. I'm not sure where it came up, and so maybe it wasn't. But yeah, no, when it was like, oh, it's Omega, I was like, oh.
I just sort of laughed with like, oh, fuck off.
Oh, no, I'm going to have to put the swear warning
said.
in, Ian. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
They knew I was here. They know what I do.
It's usually me these days. Okay, Omega. Let's talk a minute about Omega, but let's save it till after we finish. So I introduced the thought of what's the TARDIS doing, because there's a very deliberate line of dialogue, isn't there? I've only literally just come straight from watching it, but they do. The Rani, I think, brings up the TARDIS and asks the Doctor, so where's your TARDIS, Doctor? Sort of like this, doesn't she? So that is going to be important.
I mean, she's doing that to try and like, hack into his doubt. So it's like an aid memoir.
Oh yeah, maybe.
Well, the Vindicator is in the
clock. Yeah.
Yeah.
So hang on. If you remember about the Bone Palace and in the Ancestor Cell, what was the big bone artifact?
I believe that was the TARDIS, John.
It was, yes.
Oh, you think he's stealing something from the books?
Yeah.
Yeah, why not?
Obviously.
Well, and also, but not just from the books, but also from The Last of the Time Lords, right? Because it's the TARDIS that's holding the paradox together, isn't it?
I mean, has anybody heard an explosion coming from where Lawrence Miles lives in the last 20 minutes?
In fairness, the Ancestor Cell wasn't Lawrence Miles.
No.
It was just playing with his toys.
No.
Yeah.
But Bone Spaceships definitely was a Lawrence Miles thing, wasn't it?
Bone Faction
masks,
Paradox were bony. No, they had like bone TARDISes covered in animal blood that they used with their dark magics to travel through time and space. But I digress.
So maybe the TARDIS then is what's holding this whole thing together.
Well, presumably, so if the Doctor, they were in the TARDIS at the end of last week, the doors blew in. This was all a dream, but the Rani must have popped into the Doctor's TARDIS to grab the Vindicator. And is anyone else waiting for Vinda from Flux to turn up? I imagine the two TARDISes will have some kind of bearing, and he will have to pilot the TARDIS back into the Wish world, but we'll see.
So is Vindicator short for Vinda's locator?
Yes.
Nice.
But it was, what was it short for? Do you remember? Because remember, Vindicator is a shortening of 2 other words, wasn't it?
I can't remember. Yeah, what was it?
Yeah. No, I think
But
John's right. The TARDIS
I
is the
think it's a
bone.
Verada indicator because she gets so badly served by the plot that you need a device to point out where she is and what she's doing this week.
It's a Vindaloo indicator because 2004 is notorious for its.
It's a thermometer that goes up to
Yeah,
1,000.
yeah.
The
Um,
nearest takeaway, right?
um,
That's useful. I would buy that. I'd have that.
Oh,
Yeah.
I prefer a Tika locator.
Omega,
I
then.
like a salty bolty.
Are we happy to see? Well, I was
I'm
going to say
happy.
see Omega. We
I'm
don't.
happy for it to be. I was happy for it to be Omega, because again, all of Russell T Davis's decisions in this seem to make sense to me because Omega's the doctor, the Time Lord scientist. Makes sense that Ramley would be looking for him. It makes sense that he's effectively evolved into being the god of reality because
Or
he
anti-reality, yeah.
creates the antimatter universe. So that makes sense in terms of continuity. And also, I'm quite pleased because potentially he can be played by, quite a good, important actor to get me interested. I mean, Stephen Thorne's dead, unfortunately. But
I think is Ian Collier.
you could get a voice actor in to do this without spoiling it.
Bring back the original costume, though. Let's not have
Yeah.
that naff one from Arc of Infinity,
I don't
please.
think I don't think Russell T Davis is drawing on Arc of
No.
Infinity at all. for
No.
this.
Oh, no,
I tell you what, yeah, God, I tell you what made me laugh the first couple of minutes was that 160 years ago thing, which made a total mockery of JR's theory.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that bit. That bit,
Yeah.
the sort of Red
The
Riding
proper
Hood,
fairy tale. I love that.
the
Yeah.
weird sort of why is it Bavaria, and the fact that the god of wishes is born in Bavaria in 18 something, and
Grimm,
A
yeah,
basically
very
Grimm's fairy tales.
yeah,
The
Love it.
reaction I had, you had this seventh son of a seventh son of a seventh son, and then this palace made out of bone, and I got this really strong Terry Pratchett vibe because that's equal rights and Hogfather.
Oh
Or
yeah.
Baron, well, not necessarily specifically, but I got a sort of Baron Munchausen vibe. Stories spun for reasons other than just purely because they're stories.
and it is weddings with River Song, but just a little bit more palatable. So I really like the weddings of River Song and the madness of it, but I know that a lot of people were put off by just throwing Churchill and Romans and this and that. Stephen Moffat goes completely mad with it. Russell T Davis goes sort of semi-mad with this, with the bone stuff and the Bavarian opening. It just felt like it was toned down just enough to be a bit more populist.
I'll tell you what else was toned down. There was this moment where the Rani uses her sonic on the mirror ball and the music starts up, and I thought, oh
Yeah.
no, not another baddie doing a song and dance routine. But luckily, it wasn't quite as bad as some of the others.
Oh, it was fine.
It was fine, but then you've got this line about we used to dance together, and I thought you didn't get that vibe from Kate and Sylvester. And I just
Yeah, but I don't know. Did you get it from
I
Kate
don't.
and
I did from Tom
Colin?
Rani. I didn't get it from her and Colin. That's the other way around. Come on, there's a big glitter ball in Time the Rani. What else do you think she's been up to?
And I think
Don't-
her and Colin Baker very much fit together personality-wise.
mm,
They say that they cast the Time Lords, the guest Time Lords. Specifically, they say this about the Master, don't they? But I think it's true of the others too. To correspond with the personality of whoever's playing the Doctor at the time, which means that subsequently, if you keep the actor who plays the Master, they're not going to necessarily be as good a fit for the subsequent Doctors. So Anthony Ainley works well with Peter Davison because essentially he's cast for Peter Davison, but not so well with Colin Baker. Whereas I think Kate O'Mara works really well with Colin Baker, but maybe not so well with Sylvester McCoy. Yeah. Going back to what I was talking about with Omega, as we started this conversation, I was a bit kind of Omega, did it have to be? But actually, I think I've talked myself up on that one. I think Omega is the perfect choice for the leader of the Pantheon. Because what is the story of the Pantheon? It's about how gods interact with man, and the gods are all these sort of fictional, supernatural, I suppose, beasts. But Omega is the perfect one who started out as one thing and became the other thing through a natural process, and so literally holds the two worlds together. I think it's the perfect choice.
I think if we're in say that 5 season arc that I think John alluded to, RTD had plans for 5 series. If the whole thing is a big battle between magic and reality, or magic and science, and Omega's ultimately going to lead the science, mankind, nature half of that battle, and as long as we don't actually see him until series 4, then I think it could work really well. What I'm worried about is RTD the man to sort of crowbar in an explanation for how an antimatter man can enter a world of matter while he's juggling all the other balls he's going to have his hands full with next week.
See, I think you've got it the wrong way round, Ian.
Oh, sure, I have.
I don't think it's about the battle between science and magic. I think it's about where science and magic become indistinguishable. It's the whole Barry Letts thing.
But they've got to be split apart again, so we get the reset and go back to the universe of Doctor Who, where you don't have magic and
I
things.
think
So ultimately, what I was assuming was it was going to be a big,
I think,
story arc about that.
I think if you're dealing now with the Omega, the god of reality, effectively, then you can reset it in such a way that, magic is calmed down a bit.
Yeah, I
But
think you have to.
there's never been the whole idea of the David Tennant opening up the world to the supernatural kind of is a bit meaningless because gods have always existed in Doctor Who and always could exist in Doctor Who. So I'm not surprised by Lux or Maestro or anything like that. I think for me they could have quite happily existed in
We had Satan
Doctor
in
Who
the
before.
Impossible Planet, right?
Yeah, yeah. And there's always those sort of scientific workarounds, often so scientific workarounds, but not always.
I think you have to put the toy maker back in the box. And so
Take him
specific.
out of the box.
Well, yeah, but I think you have to, or not have to, but I think the story makes more sense if you put the toy maker and the sort of specific allegiances and parallels between the pantheon back in the box. But I think the point of doing the story in the first place is to reinforce the idea that science and magic are really just the same thing, but they're the same thing, but observed and defined differently. So it's not like one can exist without the other, or the two things are incompatible. They're very much compatible, but it's in the observation of them.
It's the Leonardo da Vinci thing. It's what Capaldi was referring to in his interviews. One, he wanted to be poet, philosopher, scientist, so he wanted to kind of merge all that. So maybe like Carlo Rovelli tries with his books today.
Is that going to be the villain then, Ravelli? Is that who's turning up next week? Is
Probably.
Rylan? Is Rylan coming back to play Omega? That's what I want to know.
Hang on, the go to the effect there, yeah.
Oh yeah, I think
Yeah.
so.
Oh, there you go. I'm having that. I'd watch it.
Right, we are going to come back though midweek. I thought, seeing as we're not going to have Doctor Who for a couple of years, it makes sense to get as much out of these last few episodes as we can. And plus, there's just so much conversation to be had, and we'll think about it more. So we are going to come back, some of us midweek, and have a conversation about the story so far and what's left to come this final episode and what we expect of it, what we think it needs to do, what we think it doesn't need to do. I don't know. So we will continue this conversation on Wednesday night. For now, though, is there anything more that any of you want to bring up about this? Bearing in mind, you can always just put a pin in it and come back to it in a few days.
I think that's the problem, isn't it? Because we aren't, whatever we even score it, it's going to go up or down depending on how it all turns out next week.
Well, sure. But I think also, I always say this, I think we can score it as an episode in its own right and say, how much did you enjoy that? How much? Because, I mean, as the first half of a two-parter, it has a job to do. It needs to make you excited. It needs to set stuff up. How well does it do that job is the question we're asking this week. So shall we give it a score? I came into this thinking it was a 7. I've talked myself up. I think it's actually better than that. I think it's a shame the last 10 or 15 minutes kind of became sluggish. So I'm going to go for an 8. I think if it hadn't been so sluggish at the end, I might have even gone higher than that. Ian?
I think it was maybe a 6 or a 7. Let's say a 6 because I'm naturally very mean. I think I really enjoyed the Rani stuff. I was not interested in anything that was happening with the Doctor, so it kind of got halfway there.
Fair enough. I mean, a lot of it does depend on whether Russell T Davies pulls it off next week. And we all remember what happened last year. Although, speaking of which, Matt, what are you going to give
Yeah,
this?
I really liked what happened last year, and actually, I kind of
No.
disagreed. I disagreed with John, and John's reaction on social media that it's difficult to judge this. It's a setup for next week. It looks a bit like a kind of getting from A to B without knowing where C is. I think it tells quite a distinct story. So if this was a standalone episode, it wouldn't be perfect and there'd be like something open-ended. But I think what it says about Doubt and Conrad, and as a sequel to Lucky Day, I think it's a good,
I'm
solid
not.
standalone episode. It's better than say, uh, what was the one with the weakest link, Bad Wolf.
Yeah.
Well, then
I think
it's
it's
not
better than
just.
that.
It's not even just a sequel to Lucky Day. This is a summing up of everything we've seen
Yeah.
since the Tennant specials, I think.
Yeah, but I think it's the fact that it is the sequel for me to Lucky Day as well. I think that makes it stand out as a good, not just as a good first part of a two-parter, but a good individual episode. So I think I'm going to give it a 9.
Yeah,
Um,
fair enough.
and I think next week's can either improve it or it'll keep it at a 9. I don't think it can sort of damage it for me.
John. Well, actually, before I ask John, yeah, totally agree because I think the substance of this episode, because last year we had The Legend of Ruby Sunday, which did all this stuff setting up this cliffhanger, but really without much substance. I think there's a lot of substance in this episode, and whether it goes tits up next week or not, I think there's enough substance in this episode that I think it's a valuable episode in its own right, just because of the substance of it. John.
Yeah, you kind of talked me up a little, but I was going to go with a 7 on it because I think it is kind of the weakest episode of the season so far. It's one I've kind of least enjoyed, but it is saying a lot of good things. Again, that imagery it's using is terrific, and I love that idea. Gareth Roberts got a basic career in 21st Century Doctor Who by going, "What if you put a Doctor in an ordinary situation?" And he didn't quite go. He didn't even go as far as Russell T Davies does here. I think he does that better. So he's obliviated need for Gareth Roberts even to exist now, to be honest. So that's another thing in its favour. So yeah, I think I'll go with an 8. Yeah.
Totally fair enough. And I suppose, actually, before we go, Matt, I think it was you alluded to it just now. This theory popped into my head yesterday, I think it was,
Okay.
because Russell T Davies had been, and so I think I ought to just say what it is for the benefit of the listener so they can have a good chuckle as we sign off. But Russell T Davies had said that the the main villain or whatever, the other part of this unholy trinity or whatever he's calling it, was going to be somebody who was 160 years away in time. And I suddenly went, well, hang on a second. That's more or less where Susan is, isn't it? But it turned out not to be Susan. But there you go. That's a chuckle for the listener or the viewer before we go. We'll be back on Wednesday then to talk through a lot of this stuff again, probably reaching back a bit further, but mostly talking about the continuity and the storylines that are left unresolved, I guess. And then we'll be back next Saturday in the evening, I suppose 10 or 11 o'clock, by the time we've watched and recorded and been able to put these things out. Until those things happen, I was JR.
I was Ian.
I was John.
And I was Matt.
And we will speak again soon.